Good evening, everyone. I'm Archana Das, head of Ascent Foundation. Few of you already know me. And thank you for coming for these very exclusive, curated 4 sessions that we have planned for you, virtual in association with X2 10X. Let me quickly introduce X2 10X as an entity for you. It's a business accelerator that makes the scale-up journey easier for entrepreneurs by providing products and services on the 10 core pillars, such as business design, leadership, objectives and key results strategy to execution, customer experience, founders growth, branding and marketing, people and culture, operations excellence, and tech excellence. Now, these are conversations that you are aware that we have within Ascent also on a regular basis, and hence we find the synergy in partnering with X2 10X for this very special exclusive event that we have put together for you. The team of X2 10X brings deep operating experiences gathered from scaling startup unicorns such as Flipkart, Ola, and PureFit in the entrepreneur ecosystem. The founding team includes Dini Bansal, who you all know as the co-founder of Flipkart. And then we also have Sai Kiran Krishnamurthy, who's an ex-McKinsey and has been associated with Flipkart and Ola, and Neeraj Agarwal, who we are very happy to have with us today, who's also been with Flipkart and PureFit team member. The sessions that have been co-created and exclusively curated for you, that is only 30 Ascent members in this program, are around people excellence, company operating systems, customer experience, and founders' personal growth. So of all the topics, these are the 4 that we think are critical to our entrepreneur base, and that's why we have curated it around these 4 sessions. Post these 4 sessions, we'll also be conducting a 5th debriefing session to understand your learnings and experience by participating in all these sessions. Please kindly ensure that you attend all the 4 sessions, as there is this holistic value creation for each entrepreneur member that enables you in incorporating these learnings directly in your business. As this workshop can accommodate only 30, you have been chosen out of the 700 to be part of this. So my sincere request to each one of you is actively participate in these conversations, actively participate in this workshop. You'll only benefit by being part of this. With that said, today's exciting session is on people excellence, and which will be hosted and moderated by Neeraj Agarwal and Arun Vigneshwaran from the X2 10X team. And with this, I would request Neeraj and Arun to kindly introduce themselves and take the session forward.
Archana, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, and thank you so much for having us here. Very, very excited to talk to all of you and get a chance to interact with so many of you in one forum. What we'll do now is very quickly introduce ourselves, Arun and I, and then take you through what we're going to cover in today's roundtable. And then, of course, we'll also set some ground rules of the roundtable itself, just so that we're able to get the maximum from this roundtable. Arun, why don't you start first with your introduction, then I'll go next.
Sure, Neeraj. Thank you. Thanks all for joining in. Let me very quickly introduce myself. So I lead the people excellence team at X2 10X. Joined as part of the early team. Have spent the last close to 2.5 to 3 years working with close to 60 startups in helping them scale their people practices and culture effectively in the growth journey. So these are startups. These are high growth companies as well, which are some of them very similar to the kind of audience we have today in the room. Before this, I was part of Flipkart when Flipkart was scaling from 5,000 to 10,000 employees. So I was leading some of the central functions responsible for designing the people practices for Flipkart. So that's a bit about me. Looking forward to the conversation, looking forward to exchanging ideas and thoughts in this roundtable.
Thank you so much, Arun. I'll go next very quickly. I'm Neeraj. I'm a co-founder here at X2 10X, as Archana mentioned. Before we started this company about 2.5 years ago, I spent 2 years building out PureFit as a part of the early leadership team with Ankit and Mukesh. And I had 2 roles there. One was to launch the food business and to manage the food business called EatFit. So those of you who are in Bangalore or in Bombay would have heard about the EatFit brand. And the second role that I had there was to run the people operations team for the entire company. In those 2 years, across the physical fitness business, the food business, and the primary healthcare business, we had hired about 5,000 people. And we knew that the success of the company lay in great experience for customers. And that in turn depended on our people engine because we were a very offline heavy company. So hiring those people, training them up and managing them to the point where we were seeing an ENPS, employee NPS of more than 80 and an annual attrition of less than 2-3% is something that I was responsible for. Before that, I spent about 4.5 years at Flipkart, managing the supply chain operations for Flipkart. The team grew from about 3,000 people when I joined them to about 30,000 people in 4.5 years. The company was scaling very rapidly, and I was very privileged to be a part of that company during its growth phase, because when a company grows so quickly, you learn a lot. There are things that you have to do which had not been attempted in India earlier. And that obviously is a phenomenal experience. But I'm also grateful to Flipkart because I met my 2 co-founders there, Vinny and Psyche, and they're the ones that I've started this company with. So very, 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 very grateful to Flipkart for many, many reasons. I had worked for 12 years prior to Flipkart also, largely in technology companies, but that's too far back, so I'm not going to bore you with those details. So that's a little bit about me. Through X210X now, we worked with about 170, 180 companies in the last 2 years. Companies of very, very, very different shapes and sizes. Companies which were 25, 30 members strong to companies which are 3,000-4,000 people strong. Companies at different stages of evolution, companies in different domains, companies in different industries. And the reason we've been able to work with a lot of these companies has been the fact that the foundational principles of most companies are identical, right? How should you manage your people engine? How should you think about org design? How should you align your leadership team? What sort of leaders should you hire in the company? How should you think about setting up operations for scale? So many of these fundamental concepts don't really change too much. That's really what has allowed us to work with many companies in the last couple of years now. The pillar that one of the pillars that we are most sort of passionate about is the people pillar. And that's the focus of today's roundtable. I think you ask any entrepreneur out there in terms of what is your biggest challenge, and the first thing they'll tell you is, I have not been able to hire people at the right time. I have not been able to hire the right sort of talent. I have not been able to hire people quickly enough. I have not been able to retain my right talent. The talent that has not done really well for me, I have not been able to retain them appropriately. So that's the top of mind issue that most people face in a country like India, where you're growing so quickly, but talent availability is a huge challenge. The right talent availability is a huge challenge. And while this may seem like a common issue across the board, we believe that there are some very foundational pieces that founders must get right before they can start to claim the right to hire the right talent. Right? I think if you don't set your companies up well from a people design standpoint, the chances are that you will not be able to hire people correctly, and the chances are that people, even if they do get hired, will not stay around for too long. So today's roundtable is all about how do you build a really strong people engine in your companies? What sort of design thinking should you have as you think about the people engine in your own context? We've like I said, done this with many companies now, so we can share a lot of examples with you through the course of today's roundtable. But we're going to focus on 3-4 big things today. People is a very, very wide topic. There is no way that we can cover the entire gamut of people areas within 2 hours, but we'll try and go deep into 2 or 3 areas. Areas that we've heard very commonly from people, and also areas that we believe are very important for you to get right. And after the session, also, if people have specific questions or areas that you want to talk to us about, we'll be happy to sort of spare some time. But today's roundtable is going to focus on 3-4 areas. So I want to set some context for what we're going to do today. Number one. Number two, I have one request for all of you. It's a 2-hour roundtable. It's a 2-hour discussion. And in a virtual format, it's very hard to keep the energy going without being able to see each other. So my only request is please keep your videos on. Being able to see each other allows us to feed off each other's body language, and that's very helpful. And also, please try and ask as many questions as you want. Like, we've got a lot of content to show you, but we will stop at every juncture to sort of ask for your reflections, ask for your questions. We also have a couple of activities lined for you today. So hopefully that will make it engaging also for you. Make sense? Yes? Okay. All right. Excellent. Great. Firstly, I want to thank all of you. I know we sent you some pre-work in terms of asking you what are your top of mind challenges, as you think about the people area for your companies. And I'm very grateful to many of you for having sent some really rich questions our way. And we've gone through all of them very carefully. The questions have ranged from talent hiring, talent retention. The questions have ranged from how do I form my culture in a certain manner that people do not up for delegate, people share responsibility, people become entrepreneurs in the company. The questions have also ranged to how do I manage culture between old employees to new employees? How do I manage the changing dynamics of the workplace as I grow very, very rapidly? Questions have been very rich, right? From talent to perform, there are also questions around rewards. If I heavily reward the best performers, what do my other people in the company? The other people in the company don't take that too well. They start comparing themselves to top performers and they ask for more and more money. So we'll touch upon some of these topics today. It gave me a good sense of what all of you are grappling with. It gave us, both Arun and I, a good sense of what all of you are grappling with. And I must tell you this, that most of what we saw today is something that everybody's grappling with. So you should know one thing, that you're not alone in this struggle as far as people is concerned. A lot of people are in the same boat, and hopefully today's session will help answer a lot of these questions for you. Yeah. Okay. All right. On that note, let's get going. Arun, do you want to start sharing your screen, and do you want to first talk people through what are the things that we're going to cover specifically in today's roundtable?
Sure, Neeraj. Okay, all of you can see my screen? Yes. Okay, cool. Sure. So these are the three topics we want to cover today. As Neeraj was mentioning, a lot of rich questions, and that has provided an input to be designing the content for this session. What we'll start with is we will start with a very basic, simple framework to think about people, think about how to design people for the org, a systematic way of doing it. The idea behind introducing this is that people is often a fuzzy gray topic based on our work. That's what we have heard from a lot of entrepreneurs, founders. So this is something which really helps you put some framework, some thinking in terms of how to think about building your org culture. So that's what we will start with. Then we will deep dive into two high impact practices. One is we will talk about how to shape your culture, how to design your culture. And then after that, how to sort of make it like a way of life through what we call as an org manifesto. So we'll deep dive into it, but also this is one piece which the reason why we selected is because it answers a lot of the questions which were asked around shaping culture, building culture, even around attracting talent. We'll talk about how manifesto acts as a tool for you to hire and attract great talent, the right talent for you. Also, even some of the questions like how to cascade the kind of the passion and the which you bring as an entrepreneur to the table to even your L1 team, L2 team. How to solve some of the cultural conflicts which happen, like the old versus the new, which was one question which was asked. So those are things which we will cover. A lot of your questions will get covered through that section. The second one is around performance management design. A few of you have touched upon this and rewards. So we will cover, but also what we have seen is more than the entrepreneurs and the founders. In fact, this is something which we hear from people a lot. So this is top of mind for people. Because ultimately after working for 3 months or 6 months, they really look forward to hearing in terms of how they are doing, feedback for themselves, and how they are assessed, whether they are being assessed in a fair and meritocratic manner. So we'll spend some time on how to scientifically approach it and how that can be used to also drive your org culture, your talent decisions, your talent growth, your talent development, etc. Again, some of the questions you had asked. So these are two high impact practices we have chosen to deep dive into, which covers a huge spectrum of what you had asked from us. The last one, what we will spend time in is how to listen to the org continuously. So again, the principle here is people is something which is a journey. It is something which is not like we can solve once for all and it sort of remains. It's a journey. Things keep changing. So how to continuously listen to your employees, how to get continuous feedback from your employees and use that feedback to constantly build your org. Again, here we have come up with a scientific model to do it, a mix of both quantitative. Typically, numbers are not associated with people, but we have brought in some amount of numbers and also some amount of qualitative feedback. A mix of both is what comes in the third section. So these are the 3 sections which we'll cover through the roundtable. Neeraj, you want to add something?
What we'll also do is obviously, take you through a lot of rich examples through each of these sections. But we will also, towards the end, we'll spend about 15-20 minutes to open up the floor for any questions that you may have, specific questions that you may have, across these topics or any other topic pertaining to people. So just so that you know, this is not going to be a 2-hour session where only we're going to be talking. We will obviously open it up for you guys to be able to ask any questions that you may have, but also during every section, please feel free to sort of stop us and ask us any question that you may want to ask us about that section during the course of the roundtable. Make sense? Any reflection so far? With us so far, so good? Okay, let's move on.
Okay, cool. We'll start off with the framework for you to think about shaping people, shaping culture.
Just before we go there, Arun.
Yes.
Look, the one thing we also wanted to say was, we saw the employee strength. Archana and Ruchika shared with us employee strengths in all of your companies. The companies range from 50 people strong to even 1,000 people strong. It's a very, very wide range of employee bases that we've seen across the cohort of people who are attending this roundtable today. But the average number also is a fairly decent number, which means that you already have a very decent sized population working for you in terms of employee base. Please remember that what we're going to take you through today are fundamental design principles that I think if you do not put in place fairly quickly, and if you allow your employee strength to grow organically beyond a point without the right design thinking in your people engine, it will become extremely painful for you at some point in time. I can say this from experience because, for the longest time, Flipkart, the company that I used to, that I enjoyed so much working for, did not have a very good design as far as culture is concerned. If you remember way back in 2014-15, every day you would pick up the paper, you'd find an article saying so-and-so person has left the company and so many leaders have left the company, right? So it was a company that was doing great work, but was also seeing a significant amount of churn because of attrition and because of culture not being defined well. So please remember that if you do not design your people practices well, regardless of the momentum in the business, you will find that the people engine in the company will keep on dragging you backwards. And one of the big reasons why there was a point in time where Flipkart started to really stutter and falter was because our people engine was really failing us. And so we had to do a lot of ground up work in terms of redesigning our culture, redesigning our people engine to be able to become the high performance organization that we once were. So very important to remember that if you do not design, I also remember the very famous thing that somebody had once told me. He said, look, we spend so much time thinking about the product that we are building through our company, thinking so much about the product that we want our consumers to experience. Somebody's building, let's say, a food business, and he's selling food. Somebody's selling, cosmetics. Somebody's selling, item A versus item B. We think so much about what are we selling, what products are my consumers consuming, are they happy about it, not happy about it, but we tend to forget that the company we are building is also a product that our employees are consuming every single day. How many times have we gone back and asked our employees, are they happy with the product that they're experiencing every day? The answer is very, very little, right? We take customer feedback every week after every transaction. How many times do we go back and take employee feedback? So today's roundtable is going to be about the importance of design thinking in getting your people engine right. If you don't get this right, I promise you scaling up is going to be a very painful journey for all of you, right? So that's the broad context that I want to set before Arun starts to talk about the framework that we've put in place to think about your people engine in a certain manner. Over to you, Arun.
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Neeraj. Yeah, I'll jump directly into the framework. So I'll start from down and very, very quickly cover the entire framework and then pause for questions. So down, what you see is org principles. Org principles is nothing but what does the org stand for? What do you stand for as an org? Often articulated in form of why do you exist? What are the things you do as an org? What are the behaviors which are typically termed as leadership principles or values? What are the behaviors which are cool and which are not cool for the organization? And that sort of builds the kind of org you want to do. The most important thing about org principles is there are 2-3 things which we have seen from experience. One is this is unique. There is no one size fits all. There are a lot of organizations or founders we have seen take up 2-3 handbooks. Netflix has a great handbook, yes. Valve has a great one. But this has to be something which is written down. As Neeraj was mentioning, this is almost like how you write down the specifications for your product. The same way you write it down for the kind of org you want to build. So this is unique. This can't be copied from any other handbook. Second one is with the kind of scale you are today at, this becomes important that it is there. We have seen again at Flipkart, this was something which we did quite late. That's a mistake which we made at Flipkart. And what tends to happen when there is no clear clear articulation of what the org stands for in terms of its values, in terms of why, what tends to happen is that then the culture starts getting diluted. So by 2015-16, when the org was growing really fast, we figured out that there are multiple silos at Flipkart. There was like one mini FedEx, there was one mini Google. This is all because there was the talent coming from different places and we were hiring from everywhere. But we didn't have a clear thing that this is what Flipkart stood for. And suddenly there was old versus new kind of a conflict started happening. There was like one old Flipkart culture which everybody longed for. And then ultimately it did not end well around 2016-17. Both the old and the new leaders, there was a lot of attrition before it sort of got into stability. So it becomes very important. Small things, when I say about what we write down, even small things like practices, what the org is known for. When we were getting talent from across the spectrum, we had actually leaders coming in and saying, I want a corner office. Well, Flipkart was never known for, it was always known for an open office. And because it was not very clearly articulated or called out, there was suddenly the org became a mismatch and a lot of hopscotch of cultures. So that's the importance of having the base org principles. And once the base is there, then on top of that, you build your processes, structures, practices, and people. Processes, structures are nothing but a mix of too many processes can be quite bureaucratic, too less can be quite chaotic. So what is the right balance at the kind of scale you're operating at? Some of these working well is what we have seen to be important. And we are not talking about Six Sigma processes for sure. These are simple things. Like we have seen, like for alignment, having goals or OKRs or a balanced scorecard kind of a methodology to align your entire org to be very powerful. For communication, having regular town halls with transparent AMAs, ask me anything kind of sessions being very, very powerful. Similarly, for decision making, we used to have a ritual called decision sessions, which anybody can invoke if they feel they are being stuck, and the leaders have to come and resolve it. So on and so forth. So simple rituals. Practices are people practices. Here again, people are the customers and they experience these practices. So important to design them for the end customers, which are the people. And again, here for all these blocks, there is no one size fits all approach. That is what we'll also explore through the course of this roundtable. It has to be sort of designed in alignment with the kind of culture, the kind of talent segments you have. To give you an example, say for example, like say Cred calls out skin in the game as one of their core values. So if skin in the game is one of the core values which comes under org principles, then in performance and rewards, especially rewards, equity forms a huge part of the rewards, and they do frequent buybacks, and that's what attracts people today. So the entire design of these practices in alignment with what we have in org principles become important. The last one is people, the people in the org itself, which are your leaders, your managers and your teams. Managers very, very important, because as you scale above 50, they become the primary touch point for people. We have seen like managers having a huge impact on the overall org health. We'll come to those data points later, but managers, how they are doing, whether they're doing simple things like one-on-one conversations, giving development feedback, helping people in problem solving, that becomes very important. So think of this framework more like building blocks of a good org health, something which we should focus on. And as I mentioned, you don't need like, very elaborate processes, very simple rituals, and sometimes just even thinking about these and making some informed decisions itself helps as you scale. So that's the reason behind introducing this framework. I'm going to sort of pause here and get your thoughts, get your questions. Have you thought of people in this way? That's something which you would like to hear from a few of you.
Anybody, does this resonate, not resonate? Have you guys, this is a framework that we've attempted, but we'd love to hear from you very quickly on whether this resonates or doesn't resonate.
Yeah, it does resonate, but unfortunately for me, we've not been able to, implement this, maybe because of time constraints and not having, the right kind of advice how to do it.
Okay. Yeah, don't worry. So obviously, today's roundtable will help clarify some of these things, Ashwin, but even subsequently, we will figure out ways to sort of give you more and more content.
Yeah. Neeraj, can I ask? So we have done a few of those things where we do town halls, and we've taken a attempt at OKRs as well, but actually ritually following it through, making sure that everybody in the organization actually takes it seriously and not that has been one of those tricky challenges. So we start with an OKR, everybody fills it up. We sort of have milestones where we are periodically checking on OKRs.
Yes.
And then it just dies its own natural death because everybody's just too busy to just sort of update this, and people just walk into the room and they're like, so that has been one of those difficult challenges that we have typically faced at least.
Great point, Sailesh. Look, I say this to you: if something is not deeply embedded in the psyche of the people in the company, then it's just an experiment. It's just something that has been tried for a few weeks and then let go of. If something is a deep part of the cultural tenet of the company, then it will not be let go. Right? I'll give you an example. In Kyofit, when we started OKRs, it was very clear to everybody. It was put in our manifesto. Kyofit had a constitution document. We will show you what a constitution document looks like here today also. It was there in the constitution document saying, we will run this company through OKRs, and OKRs are going to be linked to your performance. So everybody knew from day one that this is an absolutely critical way of working in this company, and nobody ever questioned it. Yes, people had suggestions to give to make the process more effective, to make the process much more efficient, but nobody questioned the use of OKRs. And it became a ritual in the company that you just had to follow. We had another ritual in the company where anybody joining the company, for example, in the first sort of town hall, had to stand up and do what is called a straight talk, to talk about themselves, one area of passion. It was a ritual embedded in our constitution saying, people must know you beyond your work, right? That's how you create camaraderie. So if there is something which is deeply embedded in your constitution or embedded in your way of working, then people cannot say, I'm going to do it today, but not do it tomorrow. So something for you to reflect back on in terms of what could we have done to make sure that people recognize certain things as non-compromisable in terms of ways of working. And we'll talk about the importance of the manifesto in absolutely casting them in stone as we go along in the roundtable. Yeah.
Neeraj, I have a couple of points, especially on the manager side, right? I think it is, as you mentioned, it's very important.
Yeah.
We have done, I would say, average on that. Would like to understand, like, how do you take care of overall development of a manager? Because a lot of times managers are those people who rise up from the teams, right? And they do not have the right managerial upbringing or training. And my second question, which is also linked to this, is that how do you design the org in terms of where you put leaders and where you put managers? Because maybe a lot of places we need to have managers, and we have a person with a persona of a leader. Things may not work, or vice versa. So this is possibly something that I have been contemplating when I look at my own org. and would love to
Yes.
have your views as we move forward in today's session.
I absolutely love the two questions, Abhishek. Firstly, look on managers. You will have to bear with us till the last section of the roundtable, where we talk specifically about how do you objectively measure managers, and how do you then use that framework to be able to give feedback to your managers and help them develop. To say that you're not good enough, so I will not let you be a manager anymore, is not an option, because a lot of managers, like you said, grow from within teams. They're first-time managers. It's our job to help them grow effectively. We will talk to you about how you can do that in the last section of the roundtable. On org design, where do you put in leaders, where do you put in managers? I think it's I think it's a deeper question. It's a very, we have a separate session on org design, Abhishek, where we talk about how should you even think about org design, how should you think about what leaders to put in where. It's not something that I can answer for you in a couple of minutes. It requires context also of the individual company. But I can tell you this, that org design is an area that you must spend a lot of time on in terms of thinking about how do you want to structure the org. And you must do it at least once in a year, because the company's goals keep changing. And so the org design should keep changing to reflect the goals of the company. But that's for a separate session. It's a very deep topic. Again, a topic that I'm very fond of. But if I start talking about it now, I won't end.
No problem.
All right. So, yes.
Excuse me. So one last question needed from my side. So, we as directors, promoters, or, management, we are very passionate about the policies or anything that we build,
Yes.
be it delegation, be it, team building or performance and rewards.
Yeah.
How important is it for a manager to buy it so that, their teams instead are motivated to adopt these principles, and how do you make that work?
I think it's super critical. Nakul, there is no option but to get the managers to be bought in, right? If the managers don't buy in, a very critical link in the chain breaks. And if that breaks, then obviously people below that node start to feel a disconnect with the rest of the company, right? So there is no doubt in my mind that critical policies, critical ways of working, critical rituals, critical decisions, the managers need to be bought in. How do you do it? I think, look, there are various ways to do it. We will talk a lot about this concept of alignment, which is about how do you make sure that people are aware of. We'll talk about both decision-making and alignment, which is, one of the biggest concerns that people have in companies is decisions got taken and we weren't explained why. Decisions got taken and I was told to start adhering to that decision from the next day, but I wasn't told why. Or I had a point of view, but nobody even heard my voice. So I think, Nakul, a lot also depends on how many communication channels do you set up in the company to make your managers aware of what is being done, why is it being done. I know this company, I know this founder, a very, very fast-growing company. I can take the name actually, Meesho. Vidit is the founder. And we've known Meesho for quite some time now, and they were very young. Meesho, Vidit used to do this thing every month, where he sends an email out to the entire company saying the why email. It says, there were 2 critical decisions that we took in the last 1 month. Here is why we took those decisions. He actually spends time every month explaining to the entire company the rationale of the big decision that the company is taking. I know of companies where a lot of time and effort is spent in terms of communications through roundtable, through town halls. People do town halls every week in many companies. People do town halls every week with their employees. Flipkart, even in today's scale, does a town hall every week. And the idea is exactly that, to percolate more and more information, for communication to be very, very transparent, for people to not say that I wasn't aware of this. We will give you more information that you can consume and not less. So I think the onus lies on the management team to make sure that the communication flow is very, very rigorous. A lot of communication is percolated downwards, and people are giving an opportunity to express their opinion about some of the decisions that are taken, right? And good companies and good culture are built on that sort of premise. Okay, let's move on. Otherwise, we will not move on from this section. Let's move on. And again, in the next section, we'll stop for a moment to have some more questions. Arun?
Sure. Cool. So now we'll move into the section of the org manifesto. I talked about it briefly while walking through the framework and how It's called as a org. It can be called as an org manifesto, culture document, constitution document. But ultimately, it's a document about who you are, and also and it doesn't sort of stop there. It's also a set of like practices, policies, etc., which make up the org. What we will do while we take you to the section is we will share our own manifesto. It's yes, Neeraj.
Yeah, while we do that, and before you click on the link and open up the manifesto, think of the manifesto as the constitution of a country. What does the constitution lay out for people in the country? It lays out your rights, it lays out your responsibilities, it lays out what are the founding tenets of a country, correct? Yes, that's exactly what a manifesto does for your people. It's a very, very powerful document that will help you first clarify what is the company that I'm building? How do I want people who are a part of this community to behave? What is acceptable? What is not acceptable? Right? So this manifesto is probably the most powerful document that you can create for your own company. And we will emphasize this over and over again to the roundtable. Please put together a manifesto, because this can be the most powerful intervention you can make for yourself, for your company, and for your employees. Okay, but over to you, Arun, please. The link has been shared. Now you can obviously click on the link and open up the document. And while we talk you through it, then you can also go through the document. Arun?
Yes, yes. Hope all of you are able to access the document. Yes, yes. Okay, cool. Cool. So as you go through the document, you will see that, as Neeraj was mentioning, the initial 3 pages is what we call the preamble of the document, which is nothing but the answer to the questions of why do you exist, which is what we call as core beliefs and purpose. The second one is what are the things you are doing or you're going to do to achieve the kind of purpose you have put down for yourself. The third one, very important, the value system of the company, the kind of behaviors you want to exist in the company, the kind of behaviors you don't want to exist in the company. Again, there is no one right answer. Different companies want to be driven differently, and there are different kinds of culture, but it's very important that you put it down, that what are the kind of value system you want in your company. And it doesn't sort of stop. So there are a lot of documents that stop with these 3, but it doesn't stop there. If you go further, you will also see what are the workplace practices, what are the policies, and also like what is your approach towards different people practices like performance management, hiring, your talent, your recognition, which actually drives the kind of behaviors you want. So for example, if you want to build a culture of transparency, then you'll have to have practices like having all hands regularly, the kind of rituals which Neeraj is talking about in terms of you talk about your decisions, the rationale behind these decisions transparently. AMA is a very, very powerful tool we have seen, where people can post questions anonymously and the founders have to answer those questions. Reflection sessions. And these are pieces which really make embrace the drive transparency as a value. Even like in this manifesto also, if you see, we would have mentioned founder mindset to be our core value. Think like a founder is what we would have put as the core value. And if you look at our rewards approach, our rewards approach says that there will be no hikes. So the first 2.5 years of our existence, we didn't have any hikes at all. People joined either at a pay cut or people joined at the same salary, but people got equity of the company. Around 9 to 10% of the company is actually owned by the early employees, just around 40-50 people. So we call out that that's the kind of behavior we want, and we align all the systems, whether it's a reward system or a performance system. Even if you look at policies, you would have said like policies or lack of policies, because if we want everybody to think like a founder, then better we also trust them and don't not put like a lot of approval processes and policies. So that's the sort of intent behind doing that. So think of these policies, these practices as things which sort of keep your culture alive, so that it doesn't just become like a document, but these are things which sort of make it real, make it live, and make people experience them day in, day out. Right? So that is a manifesto document. Also, like another application of manifesto document, which we have seen a lot, is in hiring. So again, what we do is we share the manifesto document at the early stages of the interview itself. What it really helps is, especially in leadership levels, middle management levels, when people see the manifesto, then they clearly know like what they are signing up for and what they are not signing up for. And for us also, it makes it very clear. Like we use the values while we interview people and hire people, and makes it very clear that whether this person will actually fit in within our scheme of things and within our sort of culture. In fact, we have seen like, people not take it, and we are sort of totally fine with that kind of a thing. And also like the other thing I also wanted to mention is the document itself, the manifesto document itself. It may look like a clean, neat document, but the process to arrive at the document is not a clean one at all. It's a messy process. And I can tell that very confidently based on the work we have done with startups and entrepreneurs in helping them devise this document. In case, even in our own, there have been multiple discussions, debate. I would actually, Neeraj would be the best person to talk about it, because Neeraj, Bini, Psyche are the ones who, we took around six weeks to, I think, couple of months to arrive at this document. A lot of debates, a lot of discussions. Over to you, Neeraj, if you can share some of that experience and also some of the inspiration behind having a document like this, Neeraj.
Yeah, sure. So look, I first encountered a manifesto or a constitution document at KeoFit. I remember I had decided to move on from Flipkart, and I was evaluating my next career move. And it was during that time that Ankit and Mukesh had reached out to me and asked me to talk to them about KeoFit. And when I first met them, after my first couple of meetings with them, Ankit gave me this constitution document of KeoFit and said, look, this is the company we're building, Neeraj. Please take a look at this, and this will help you clarify what are you signing up for. And I remember that day so distinctly, because I remember reading that document late in the evening at home, and I finished the entire document, and I thought to myself that this is fantastic. And I doubt they'll be able to live up to this. But even if they're able to live up to 50% of this, this will be a great place to work in. And it was on the basis of that document that I decided to actually join KeoFit. And forget 50%, I think KeoFit as a company lived up to that document 100% every single day. It was just remarkable how much of thought had gone into. They called out phenomenal things in the manifesto document. For example, they called out that we will not have designations in the company. They called out that we will not have a dedicated HR function in the company. Every leader and every manager has to manage his own people, through his own managerial style. You can't have an HR function trying to manage your people for you, right? They called out things like we will not have different hikes for different people. Everybody will get a standard hike every 6 months. I mean, many of the principles were very, very radical for their time. And I said, look, but I not just did they call out what were they doing, they called out why were they doing that. So they said, we will not have different hikes for different people because that leads to office politics. People start then jostling for higher and higher hikes. So we will give a standard hike to everybody, so that notion of going and talking to my manager and asking for a bigger hike goes out of the window, right? It is a phenomenal document, and I think it was that document that inspired us to put together our own manifesto at X210X, and we put this together right at the very beginning when we started our company. And even though Psyche, Bini, and I know each other really well and for many years, and we thought the manifesto would be a piece of cake. We put this together in like 5-6 days time. It took us almost about a couple of months to put this together, because it was surprising how on some very fundamental aspects, the three of us had very different opinions. And we realized that if we didn't resolve it, how are we going to expect our people to know what is the right way of doing things, right? So it was a very rich exercise for us. It helped clarify to us what are the companies that we wanted to build, and help make it very clear to people who are joining us in terms of what were they to expect when they join X210X. The one thing we hear from people all the time is, in most of the companies, there is a lot of dissonance. When you are interviewing with a company, you think the best of the company. You think the company is great. When you join the company, there is a big drop in reality, and you think that, oh my God, I expected this, I got this, right? In X210X, people will tell you all the time that what you read in the manifesto to what you experience in the company is very, very close. So, and that basically means that the drop in expectation that happens after the first few months of joining the company, that doesn't happen here. And this is also true of the many, many companies now who've put together the manifesto for themselves. So I can't begin to tell you how critical it is. By the way, the other super part of a manifesto is, I remember we put in our manifesto when we first started this company, that we will not hire people who don't come from startups. Okay. in the talent philosophy, we said we will only hire people who come from startups. And there was this person who we were interviewing who didn't come from a startup background. And we really wanted that person in the team because she was great. And we were doing the leadership debrief for that person. And a young person walked into the debrief room, the meeting that was going on, and said, Neeraj, Psyche, I've heard you people are debriefing about a candidate who's not from the startup world. This is a manifesto violation. How are you doing it? And that sort of was a slap on our face, because it was a young employee telling us, you are not living up to your manifesto, right? So either you go and change it, or you explain why you're making an exception to this rule. And so we took that as feedback, and we said, you know what? We are duty bound to explain to our people why we're doing this. And that became a very important topic of discussion in the subsequent town hall. So I think the manifesto also makes leaders also accountable to their people for how they conduct themselves in a company. And I think that is very, very important. Not only are you setting the ground rules for people in the company in terms of how they should behave, but you're also setting ground rules for yourself in terms of what people should expect from you. I think that's very, very powerful for any organization. Yeah. Makes sense. Any questions on the manifesto? Did you guys did you guys sort of go through it? Did the penny drop? Did you guys feel it's important, not important? Do you think it's something that you'd want to put together?
Hi, so I had a question on this. Like, how do you resolve differences between your founders? Like the way you were discussing, like what did you do?
You just have to debate, discuss, and agree on one point of view. Sometimes, Hriday, you will feel gutted that your point of view has not been accepted. Let's say there are 3 founders, ultimately you have to vote. If there are 2 founders, then you have to find a way of resolving it. But if you don't resolve it, like in a family, right? If 2 parents are not able to resolve a conflict, I can promise you, your child will spot it the fastest, and they will take advantage of the situation. The same thing happens in a company. If you leave something open-ended because you've not been able to resolve it, I think that gives a gap to people in the company to be able to exploit, and you don't want that. So you have to work it out with their founders, your co-founders. You have to find a way to resolve it. Sometimes it's just taking a step back and saying, fine, I'm going to listen to you in this particular aspect and see how it goes. And sometimes if it's more than 2 of you, then you can do a very quick vote to decide which point of view gets accepted, but you just have to find a way.
Neeraj, I guess this is a living document, isn't it? Or is it like a stable document which is always finalized?
Yes. Look, Abhishek, there are sections of this document which are more sort of stable than the others. Okay. The views, why form this company, what are the core beliefs? You don't expect them to change every year, right? Mm-hmm. The preamble, as Arun called it, that is the more stable part of the document where you don't expect big changes. Yes, you may add a value, you may remove a value every now and then, but by and large, that the first 3 sections of the document don't change too much over time. They should not change too much over time. If you are having to go back and recalibrate your values, recalibrate your mission, recalibrate why you exist every year, then there is something wrong. That basically shows confusion more than anything else. But the second part of the document, which is around workplace practices, your approach towards rewards, approach towards compensation, approach towards talent, all that has to evolve with time. Our compensation philosophy when we first started to what it is today are different, right? The equity bias for the early employees is much higher than it is for the younger employees who are joining us today, correct? For obvious reasons, because the earlier employees took a lot more risk. Our talent philosophy has gone through a big change. So I think as the company evolves, some of the workplace practices and your processes around, the things that I mentioned will go through a change. But the first part of the document is more stable, typically. You're on mute, Abhishek.
Sorry. And just to understand, like this becomes kind of what a lot of people also call employee manual. Does it kind of replaces that? Because that's like a heavy, big document.
Yeah, which is why if you see our document, it's like a 13 page document, Abhishek. We don't like to make it very, 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 very big. There's no point making like a 200-page document that nobody can ever go through. Mm-hmm. They make it a reasonably sharp, crisp document that people are able to refer to very, very quickly whenever there is conflict. But you call out all the important things that you want to call out, right? So that there is no scope for any ambiguity on critical matters. I'll give you an example. We specifically called out that we will have an open work culture where there will be no cabins. Mm-hmm. We specifically called out that we will not encourage office politics. And one of the ways that we will discourage it from happening is, like I said, standard hikes. The other way of discouraging it is they said, when two people are talking, they cannot talk about a third person without the third person being in front of them. Can you believe it? A small thing like that, they called it out. And once it is there, then you're conscious. Then mentally you know that if I'm talking to my colleague about a third guy and he's not around, it's not acceptable. In fact, the Constitution called out saying it is the obligation of the second employee to immediately stop the conversation and call the third employee in the room if the conversation is about the third employee. So they went down to that level of detail because office politics not being there was so important to them, right? So depending on which part of your way of working is really important to you, Abhishek, there you should leave no ambiguity for anybody.
And do you still have space for policy documents after this, or this kind of replaces all of them?
I think they should. My point of view is, look, there's no point creating like a 200-page manual, different sort of policy documents kept, in different parts of the org. Just have a small short document where the most critical aspects of the policies are called out. And yes, if you want to give a link to a detailed policy document, for a particular policy, so be it. But the most important point should be captured. Look, the manifesto should be an employee should be able to read it and benefit from it very, very quickly. It shouldn't take him like 3-4 days to read it and understand it.
Right.
Because if you can't remember it, then you can't follow it.
Understood. Yeah. Thanks.
Devesh?
Yeah, I had a question. You said it took about 2 months for you to prepare the manual and you thought it would be a piece of cake. Was it because you took inputs from people across all levels in the organization, or there were a lot of brainstorming and new queries came up and several things which you had not thought about before? And my second question is, when you have in the current scenario, half of the people who have been outsourced, how to bring them in this alignment?
Yeah, I mean, look, why did we have to go through? Why did we take 2 months? Because there were some very fundamental areas, Devesh, that from a design standpoint that the three founders didn't agree on, right? We thought that we knew each other really well. We thought we were in alignment on everything. But when we started putting pen to paper, what should be a talent philosophy? What should be a rewards philosophy? What should be our core values? I think there were some very fundamental differences that came out that we had to resolve before we could actually, and that takes time. It doesn't happen over a 1 or 2 hour meeting. It takes time. Several iterations had to happen. After about a month and a half, we were able to get the first draft going. And when the first draft was ready, we showed it to our team, our 3-4 team members in those days. We only had a 4-5 member team back then. And we took their opinion also. That didn't take too much time, frankly, but the founders coming on the same page, that was the longest sort of, path that we had to traverse. The second part, Devesh, can you repeat the second question, please?
Yeah, I said currently after the pandemic, we have outsourced a lot of people and made them on, assignment basis. How to bring them into this alignment? They are actually former employees, but no longer accountable to the organization because they are not on the company payroll anymore. Yes. But they still need to, fall in line with the culture of the organization.
I mean, regardless of their payroll structure, regardless of their employment structure, if they're still if they're still doing work for the company, and if they're still dealing with your consumers, then they have to represent the company's culture and the company's brand. Right? It's as simple as that. So even if it is for outsourced employees, I think, Devesh, my strong recommendation is, depending on what sort of workforce you're talking about, you should create like a manifesto version for them also. So in CureFit, we had a corporate version, which was meant for a corporate staff, but we also had a version for our field staff. We had a version for our physical fitness trainers. We had a version for our kitchen staff. We had a version for our doctors and nurses. It's very important to create a version for them also, so that they know that while they're associated with this company, this is acceptable, this is not acceptable. And this is what they are obligated to get from the company, and this is what they're obligated to do for the company. Okay. All right. Can we move on from this section in the interest of time? And then again, towards the end, we'll come back now and open the floor up for more questions. Let's move on, Arun.
Sure. Cool. I think the one data point I wanted to leave you with as we move away from this is that So we do a work around a metric called ENPS. ENPS is employee NPS, employee net promoter score, similar to how we do customer net promoter score. It's an answer to a simple question of how much would you recommend the org on a scale of on a 11-point scale, 0 to 10. And then it is calculated based on promoters minus detractors by total. Promoters meaning 9 and 10, detractors are 0 to 6, and passives are 7 to 7, 8. Very similar to the NPS scoring. We have seen that people who don't have a sense of pride about their org, and we have seen that having a very clearly articulated culture helps a lot in people rallying around and having that sense of pride. But people who don't have a sense of pride have an ENPS of minus 87. So that means like they're most likely to be a detractor if they don't have a sense of pride about the company or the org. And of course, I'm not saying the manifesto document is the only practice or the only intervention is going to get you that sense of pride, but we have seen that to be a very, very important tool in the founder's hands, in the entrepreneur's hands, to have a sense of pride. So that's one data point I wanted to leave you with before moving on. I think we wanted to share a few questions for you to get started with your own manifesto in case you don't have it. I also saw a question in the chat box where somebody had asked that, you know about the org manifesto, but now we have to get it done. I think these are questions which will help you start the conversation on the manifesto. In fact, even in the work we do with startups in organizations to help them put the manifesto, the answers to these three questions help form the preamble. And then it's a matter of then aligning the policies, practices, and in case there are some new practices to be designed, etc. The first question is a fundamental question around why do you exist? And the answer to this lies in your journey so far. Some of the core beliefs which led you to starting this company, and also some of the core beliefs which help run this company in your journey so far and even for the future. And the answer to this question should clarify what your organization will or will not do. And it should be inspiring. That's very important with respect to your purpose statement. Even if you look at the X10X purpose statement, that's one lens which we kept very clearly. It should be inspiring to you for sure. It should be inspiring to the people in your org and even to your stakeholders and your customers. So it can't be like, say, for example, there is this edtech company which you're working with who said like, my purpose statement is to make learning simple. And it's very vague and it doesn't inspire, right? And then of course, so the statement has to inspire, it has to be rooted in things which people do. But at the same time, it also can't be too granular and detail oriented. It has to be the right balance. So that's question number one. Question number two is your mission statement, your mission in terms of what are the things you're going to do over the next 4 or 5 years to get to your purpose. And again, we have seen like you picturizing the company 4 or 5 years down the lane and writing down an article really helps you get there. And the last one is what are those 3-4 behaviors that make your org special. Now here in this case, it's worth actually going and talking to not only about your point of view, but also going and talking to your people, talking to your leaders to arrive at these values or behaviors, because this is something which can't be just written down on a document and say that I want to be this, because 80% of this has to be things which happen today in your org. So it has to be like, say today, if you have a strong action orientation, bias for action, then that becomes your value. It can't be like, you put down a word and, of course you can aspire towards some, but that can be only 20%. 80% has to be things which are already your DNA. And to get that, very useful to talk to your leaders, talk to your people before arriving at these. So think of these 3 questions as a starting point. If you don't have a manifesto, please start answering these 3 questions. And I'm pretty sure automatically it will sort of lead you to the path of having your org manifesto in shape over the next few weeks, depending upon the amount of debate you have in the org. So that's the, and then typically would have liked to also do an exercise, but considering that we don't have time, we'll move on. In case you have any questions, we can take it post the session. In case if you're attempting to do this and if you need any help, please do reach out. We can sort of, we have a conversation around that. So I'm going to move forward now. And yeah, this is the last piece around the manifesto before closing the manifesto section, which is we talked a lot about the document and also how to get to the document. This is about how to make it a way of life. So once we have the document, how do you keep it real? One is, of course, we do something called a reflection session every quarter, where anybody can ask uncomfortable questions about like why we are doing this and why we are not doing this, like how Neeraj was saying. That keeps the manifesto real. Talking a lot about the manifesto in your town halls, in your sessions helps. Talking about some of your value system, your values, your behaviors in the language which people understand. Say you have a blue collar workforce, then how do you talk about action orientation in the language which people who are working in the floor understand? That really helps. But this one, what I'm showing you in this slide, is a hard-coded way of doing it, which is take your values, break it down into what we call as competencies, and start using those competencies for your hiring process, your performance management process, etc., even for your promotion processes. Like say, for example, in this case, we have a value called be the best version of yourself. For us, the competency which came very close to that is subject matter expertise. Further, we have broken it down into 2-3 sub-tenets. And we have also like fleshed out what we call as rubrics, which in terms of what does 4 out of 4 look like for a leader, for a business development person, for a tech person, for a person on the ground, right? What does subject matter expertise look like? Once we have something like this, then this is what we use for hiring. So when somebody joins this, each of the interview panel, the interviewers, in fact, go and probe on one of these competencies. And that really helps us keep these values real and live. Same thing, we use it for performance management as well. This is what people give feedback on. In fact, we get also peer feedback, stakeholder feedback on this. And that get these values live. If people are not getting staying true to these values, then that gets called out and gets like dinged in the performance management system, and so on. Of course, we use it for promotions as well. So this is like a very structural way of thinking about how to keep your values and your culture alive, other than the other pieces of communication, reflection sessions.
The people that you hire are going to be the single most important intervention you will make in the growth of your company, correct? And not having design thinking behind how are you hiring your people, I think is the worst mistake you can make. This gives you a framework and tells you your hiring process should reflect the competencies that derive from the values that you've laid out that make or break the people in this company. People who don't exhibit the values that you want to see them exhibit every single day, obviously are not the right people for you to be hiring. And what is the best way to hire? What are the best way to evaluate them? It is through this competency framework. I remember when we done this work for some company a few quarters ago, and the founder wanted a very good competency framework across all levels in the company. For the sales org, I remember we spoke to the person playing that role, city manager, city head for sales. We spoke to his leader, which was his manager, which was the overall sales leader in the company, and we spoke to the founder. And we asked each of them to call out what is the expectation from that role, right? From the city sales head role. You will not believe the difference that came out between what the founder expected from that role to what the sales leader expected to what that guy himself expected. Now, if in a company, all three of them have such varying expectations of that one role, how will you ever have a good performance conversation? So not only in your hiring process, but even in your performance management conversations, I think having a framework like this, which comes from your core values, converted into competencies, converted into rubrics, I think is very, very important as you said, as you start to sort of hire more and more people and start to performance assess them periodically. Yeah, that's a limited point that we wanted to make for you. This is a deep exercise, takes time, but please do it. This is, if hiring is important to you, then this has to be equally important. Okay? Questions?
Just had a question here.
Yes, Ankit.
The competencies can match with the talent, but then how does it fit into the overall manifesto? What I mean by that is sometimes you get a talent which is matching your competencies and what you require, but somewhere doesn't fit into the organization structure what you have.
Yeah.
So you spoke about in the manifesto that in your manifesto, you said that you will get someone only from the startup field and not from anywhere else.
Yes.
So isn't that a conflict within your competency versus your manifesto, and how do you solve that?
No, not necessarily, Ankit. In the first couple of years, we were very clear that we wanted to build a team of people who could empathize, who could relate to the problems of the startup ecosystem. And unless you've been a part of the ecosystem, you really can't empathize with the challenges of the startup ecosystem, right? So that was the thinking in the first couple of years. Having said that, that was a broad filter that we applied. But when it came to hiring specific people for specific roles, this competency framework came into being. Right?
Okay.
But the broad filter for which set of people would we even consider, that was the filter that we applied, that he or she has to be from the startup ecosystem.
Okay. Yeah.
Anything else?
How to understand that the organization's values and the candidate's values are not in conflict with each other?
This is the way to do it, Vinayak. Take your organization values, convert them into competencies, put in rubrics to measure those competencies. That is how you will know whether the value that you want the person to have and the value that the person brings to the table, whether they're in alignment or not. This is exactly the slide to address that particular question.
Okay. But you feel that within 1 hour, 1.5 hours, 2 hours, the values of other person can be fully understood?
It's a great question, Vinayak. So typically what we recommend is that every candidate coming in, please have 4 or 5 people meeting him from a leadership panel. And every person should not have a broad-based discussion. Let's talk about your life. Let's talk about what you did. No. Every person should focus on one competency only. If that competency has been broken down into the right rubrics, 1.5 hours of going deep in that competency is more than enough. Then the leadership, then the 5 panelists can get together and debrief and say, on this competency, this is what I found. On this competency, this is what I found. Right?
Okay.
But one person, one competency only. Okay, let's move on, Arun, in the interest of time.
Sure, cool. Fine. So that closes the entire section on manifesto. Please do, if you don't have a manifesto, please do start with those questions and put down yours. That's a strong recommendation. Now we'll get to performance management. Again, as I was mentioning earlier, this is something which is not very top of mind among founders, but at the same time, we have seen this to be the most top of mind topic for people. And in all our one-on-one conversations, focus group discussions we've done with people, we have seen this come out a lot. I think what really people look for is, how do I get feedback after having worked so hard? How do I ensure that I'm being assessed fairly? How am I being assessed in a fair and meritocratic manner? That's what we keep hearing from people. What we see is, and for an org also, like the PM as a system, how it can help you. It also answers some of the questions you had asked earlier. One is it helps you align people towards the kind of common goals you have set for yourself. You would have set goals in terms of, say, balanced scorecard, OKR, but at the same time, this is where finally people get measured and people get are given feedback. So this becomes important. It also gives you a lot of data to take key people decisions. So I saw a lot of questions from you around how to reward people effectively, how to grow people, how do you identify people who are managers and how do you grow them into leaders, etc., etc. I think this process helps do that. I also talk about specific touch points in this process to help you do that going forward. And this is also a big tool which you have to reinforce org values. So again, all the values what you've articulated in the manifesto, this is where you can actually measure them. So what we do at X210X is, say we have a value called, say, product thinking. In fact, we get peer feedback on that. We get 360-degree feedback. We get feedback from peers, stakeholders, direct reportees. And that really helps drive the org values in the, in the company. So that's how, for an organization also, it's important. And for people, as I mentioned, feedback, very important. Also gives them a lot of guidance for what is the right behaviors, what is good performance looking like, and also finally rewards, which is like the third thing which is there on people's mind. Again, very similar to how I talked for the manifesto, even for PM, people who feel that the PM process is not fair and meritocratic have an ENPS of -34. So again, a big chance of becoming a detractor in case the process which you have in place for performance management is not fair. The largest qualitative statement we hear is, this is just something which my manager does, and my manager is very, very biased, or it is just happens based on my manager opinion, and I just need to keep my manager happy. And that's the last thing which you want after people put all their efforts, and that's the last thing what people also want. So that's what we want to tackle in the next 10-15 minutes, in terms of how you can think about putting in a good performance management structure, and how to put in a good design, which can actually keep you in good stead even as you sort of grow. So what I'm going to do next is, like, I'm going to talk through a few design principles, a few design choices you have. Very quickly, I will run you through them. This will give you a good starting point to start thinking about performance management. In case you already have one, please do evaluate how does your performance management stand against some of these choices. And I would like to hear your thoughts in a short while. And looking at the choices itself, what are these choices? One is, why do you want to do performance assessment? Look, there are different approaches which are there. There are companies which do it purely for getting development feedback. Like we do it in a very similar manner at Extrude10x, where we purely do it for development. There are companies who do it for purely bucketing, giving rating, and then using that rating for reward. So that's a very philosophical, fundamental thing on why. Then the second question, very important, in terms of what is going to be the focus of the assessment. Are you going to focus on some output matrices, or are you going to focus on some inputs which people have put in place? Now, output is typically your numbers, your KPIs, your matrices, your goal achievement. While input is usually what is your score on your values? What is the score on your competencies? So both become important, but both are not equally important for every role. Say, for example, if you take a operational role, you only want that person on the ground to just get your numbers. You don't want that person to exhibit any long-term thinking or any product level thinking. But at the same time, if you look at you take your business head, you want your business head definitely to not only think about numbers for that quarter, you also want that person to think about numbers 2 quarters down the lane. You want the person to think about if there are some automation efforts possible. You want the person to also build a team under him or her. So those are what we call as competencies, in addition to the numbers which you want the person to achieve. So I think that's a design choice for you in terms of for your different parts of your org. What is the kind of mix you have between metrics, goals, and competencies? And then you have a choice around how often do you want to do it. Look, doing it once in a year is now outdated. We get feedback from customers frequently. Same thing, same way, employees also expect feedback frequently. So there are multiple approaches here. You do it regularly, like every quarter. You can do it like once in 6 months. You can also do it continuously. We'll talk about few models going forward. And the second last one is, what is going to be the assessment bar, relative, absolute. This is a choice where, do you want to have a tight curve? So companies like Amazon follow it. A lot of the old school companies follow it, and now the trend is towards moving away from the curve. Curve is nothing but saying that only 20% or 30% of employees can be top performers. The remaining would be there will be a median, and then there would be like bottom performers. But today in a lot of the high growth companies, the thought process is that there are a lot of people who are doing quite well. So it doesn't make sense fitting them into a curve, but rather evaluate each of them for the kind of goals and the matrices they have done. And so that is that choice you need to take, which also has its cons, but it's a choice you need to take. And finally, promotion. How do you do promotions? Do you want to do promotions based on how people have performed? Or do you want to take a bet on people? You see that the person has some sparks, some potential, and you want to promote people. Again, something which is a philosophical approach. There are some companies which say I don't have any levels at all. So that means what is just promotion is just rewards based. When you promote, you get more stake in the company, or maybe you get more rewards, but there is no level at all. There are companies which also operate that way. We have seen doing that. So again, something for you to think about. And the purpose behind putting all this is, if you have thought through answers to each of these questions, then you have your performance management at the right the right design. And that will really help you as you get more and more people, and for people to also see that there is a process, there is a system which ultimately assesses them fairly and gives them the fair kind of rewards which they are entitled to. So these are the choices. I'm going to very quickly pause. Any questions, any thoughts? Also, it would be interesting to hear from some of you, in case you already have a good PM process in place. How do you see some of these playing out in your processes?
We can say one thing from experience, that regardless of what you think is your top priority as a founder, which is hiring and retaining people, the most important thing for employees in a company is this. They work really hard for a year, and this is the moment of truth for them in terms of them feeling satisfied or dissatisfied with how they were judged on the past year's work. And not having a well-designed process, I think, is doing a tremendous amount of disservice to them and to the company in terms of not being able to objectively identify which people have done well and which people haven't. Leaving it to the biases of managers and the prejudices of managers is the surest way of creating silos, of creating bad culture, of creating fiefdoms in the company. So please make sure that there is good design thinking that is brought to the table as far as their performance process is concerned. Because if this is not good, if this is not done well, I think nothing else will matter. Right? You will keep losing people very, very quickly. You may not give people a good hike in a year because the company is not doing it, which is okay. People understand that. But if you don't give him objective feedback, and if you don't even have a good conversation with the employee on how the person has done, if he doesn't feel that his efforts were not even acknowledged, then I think there is a problem. So I think you owe it to your people before you think about hiring great talent. Have you created the right processes in the company that merits having great talent in the company? That's something you have to ask yourself and start here. Any questions?
Arun, I've got a couple of questions. I wanted to understand now, in a situation where you are delinking, say, rewards from performance management, right? Or even in the last point wherein you are saying that maybe rewards are based not necessarily on the performance that you did, but on the intrinsics. How do you, I mean, the whole biases or the politics around manager is biased, or that manager is a good manager because he gives increments to everybody, and this manager is a bad manager who doesn't give increment to anybody. How do you sort of try to actually just objectify in the entire company? Because even in the part where you said that, people are moving from relative fitting curve to absolute, right? There is a manager who probably thinks that everybody in my team is so great. And there's a manager who thinks everybody in my team is just terrible. It seems like in an event that if you choose the model which is like this, you are more likely going to create really bad office politics if you end up doing this.
Got it. Neeraj, you're unmuted.
You should finish the next slide. One of the first things we talk about is really how do you take care of managerial differences in terms of how they give ratings to people. We'll talk about that in the next slide, so please bear with us for some time. Okay, let's move on, Arun, to the next slide. Let's go to the best practices one.
Got it. Cool. So very quickly, we'll talk about some best practices, irrespective of the kind of choice you take. What are some of the best practices which you have seen bring a lot of fairness and meritocracy to this entire process? One, talent reviews. So talent reviews is, and it again answers a lot of the questions which were asked, which is nothing but what is your talent supply, which is your inventory of talent which you get through your performance reviews. And also what is the kind of demand you have in terms of your critical roles, the roles you're looking to hire newly, which will come out of your org design exercise. So when you do your org design exercise, you will know that here are some of the new capabilities and new roles I need to fill in case I have to grow this much over the next couple of years. And the talent reviews exercise is something which really helps match which are the right set of talent, which is the right set of performers potential to these critical projects. So that's something which we strongly recommend doing this at least once in a year, because this gives a very objective way for you to think about talent growth. So typically what happens in this is like we discuss about every talent, we talk about the potential of every talent to grow to the next role. And it's an opportunity to look inside and see, rather than go and hire for roles outside for every role. It's an opportunity to look inside and see who can be promoted. And there is of course an objective, there is a mix of science and art. There is an objective way of measuring potential. Getting 360 feedback, etc., is a good way of getting feedback on people. And also there is a discussion, there is a panel which discusses about people and finally take these calls. But having this one session every year also gives you a lot of impact in terms of looking at your talent and seeing how they are growing. That's talent reviews. Point number 2 is what answers your question, Shailesh, which is calibrations. That really helps a lot in terms of maintaining that absolute bar. Say, and startups decide to go absolute. Flipkart, when I was leading PM, we decided to go absolute in around 2015-16. That's when, and before that we were following a curve. Having strong talent calibrations where we discuss people and ensure that there is a org-wide bar which is set, and we ensure that managers have done the right job. So what we did was we told managers that you need to do the right job. It can't be that you come with 90% outstanding performance and exceed expectations. You'll have to do the right job. You'll have to evaluate people on the competencies, evaluate people on the OKRs. And once that was done, when we did the calibration, if the manager had not done a right job, and if the person had come with 90% and the person was not able to justify in these calibrations, then very difficult questions were asked. In fact, in some of the places, the managers were themselves dinged. Their rating actually were taken one notches below, because the managers, one of the primary responsibilities is the manager as a people manager, right? So that really drove a culture. In fact, the second time we did it, the curve organically came to around 39 or 40%, which is 40% of OP and E is what you used to call outstanding performance and exceeds expectation. While with the curve, we used to have a 45% OPE kind of a curve. So organically, people did the right job. When they were empowered to do so, when calibrations were strong, and when there was a right OKR or matrices in place and the right competencies in place. So I think the process needs to be slightly more mature while going a lot more absolute, but it also reduces a lot of noise and angst. Else, a lot of angst comes from this very fact that people say, managers say that, no, I wanted to give you an EE, but HR came and told me we can't give you an EE because of the curve. So that lot of angst sort of goes away. So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is 360 feedback, something which we strongly recommend in any cycle you do. Drives a lot of richness, removes manager bias. 360 feedback is nothing but getting feedback from peers, from stakeholders, from direct reportees on each and every competency. You remember the competencies we showed you? So each and every competency, getting 360 feedback adds a lot of richness to the process. Fourth one is a unique practice which we have seen now few startups doing it. CureFit sort of pioneered this practice of having a performance cycle linked to the date of joining of every individual. That means like every individual has a custom performance management process. So today, if I join, I get a performance feedback conversation 6 months down. Somebody joins 2 weeks later, they get 2 weeks later. Of course, it places a strain on the system, but if it is done well, then feedback is continuous, and also feedback is spread throughout the year. We don't have to like wait for for 6 months or for 1 year to get feedback. Everybody has their own cycle. There is no comparisons which happen because there is a cycle which is happening. So that's the fourth point. Fifth point, we already talked about: no curve, no force fitting. Try to move away from the curve as much as possible. The last one is the move away from numbers. The idea is to not to say like, have no ratings at all. Have only ratings where needed. Don't have like, look, these systems where we say we put a lot of numbers. We say like, 3 against this goal, 4 against this goal, take an average, and say 3 against this competency, 4 against this competency, take an average, and do an overall average. Then finally say that, your rating is 2.3 out of 4. It doesn't make a lot of sense, because ultimately why we are doing the PM is because we want the person to get feedback and grow and develop. 2.3 is not going to work. So the idea is that, have a lot of qualitative feedback, build the system around it, have few ratings to land these feedbacks, but don't go into a very mathematical way. A lot of companies tend to think that going fully mathematical is objective, but it's not. It doesn't serve the purpose beyond a point. So these are few of the best practices, nevertheless, of the choices you take to sort of keep in mind. Before I sort of end this, I also wanted to take a minute to answer your question, Shailesh, about delinking rewards. That's also another practice which we have seen happen quite well. We have done it in X210X. The way it works is, look, the moment performance management and rewards comes together, the comp comes together, then the entire focus of the performance conversation gets to, like, whether I'm getting 10% hike or 15% hike. This practice works really well in companies where you don't have a lot of differentiation, where if you are very convinced that if you have 50 people or 100 people, if you are convinced 80 or 90 people are all carrying the weight and they're all doing really well, and there's nothing much to differentiate, then don't get into the process to really spend a lot of time bucketing people into 2, 3, 4, and then doing 23%, 21%, and 18%. It's a waste of org time, and also everybody's attention is on that, right? So then rather what CureFit does is, what we do is, performance cycle happens, it's purely development focused. Rewards is standard. So that's a standard hike which is given of, say, 10%, 15%, etc., depending on company performance. There's a standard hike given. If bonus is there, there's a standard company bonus which is given. It's uniformly distributed. There is no performance linkage. The only thing which we do is equity or ESOPs, which if there is an extraordinary performer, then there is some extra equity given. So that's the only place where rewards is linked to PM. So what it does is, like, when performance management cycles, the entire fear around performance management, people giving, like, I scratch your back, you scratch my back, all those things sort of go away. Then, what tends to happen is people just focus on giving feedback and performance, and rewards is like, rewards what people get based on company performance. I wouldn't say it works for everyone, but it works for companies where if you feel like 70-80% of your talent are all, like, carrying their weight, then definitely why not? We have seen that work, quite well, Shailesh.
Arun, time check. I know we are slightly behind time. Can you please move on to the next section? Let's take questions towards the end now, if you don't mind.
Sure, cool.
Okay, let's move on.
Cool. Now coming to the last section, which is listening continuously and improving. The idea is that, how do you constantly get feedback from people to build a healthy culture? And again, for people, we have seen that it is very important because it gives them a mechanism to voice their opinion, be part of building the org. And also it's an opportunity for them to provide feedback to managers and leaders. We'll talk about what is a mechanism you can use to listen continuously to your people. It's a scientific method we have evolved based on the work we have done with close to 70 organizations. Something which you can use to get feedback on each of those different building blocks which we covered at the start. So that's what I'm going to sort of take you through in terms of what is the mechanism you can use to listen to people. Yes, so I'll spend some time on the mechanism itself. What you see in the screen is in fact like a heat map of how your org health looks like today. This is in fact an anonymized version of a real company for which we did this work. There's a company with 400 employees. Today, in fact, this 400 has become 1,200 or 1,500. It has grown really fast over the last couple of years. It's in the food space. Now, the way to read this is, so you see the same building blocks, what we had introduced as a framework to think about people, and against which you see different colors. What you see at the top, you see an score of ENPS. Now, ENPS comes from like one single question in terms of how much would you recommend the org on a scale of 0 to 10. It's 11-point scale. And it's calculated based on promoters minus detractors by total. Promoters is, as I mentioned earlier, 9, 10. Detractors is 0 to 6 and 7, 8 are passives, right? Now, in this case, the reason why it is marked in red is because ENPS is 4. And 4 is like, this is a scale of minus 100 to 100. And 4 is in the bottom quartile in the set of companies we have worked with. And it's not a great place. And also 4 means that, you have the equal number of detractors as much you have promoters, which is not a good place to be at all. right? And we have seen that once you are at that place, then you start losing talent, people are demoralized, and the morale of the company goes down. And that's the reason why you see it in red. Now, don't stop at the just getting that ENPS score. ENPS is a just simple question you ask your people. It can be done through a survey. But what we also recommend doing is also get feedback on each of these blocks from people. And the way you can do it is like use a survey. So you can use a survey. So the way we do it is like we have a survey, a 57 question survey. Each block has 3 to 4 questions asking. So for example, if it is alignment, on alignment, we ask questions around, do you have clarity on your goals? Do you have clarity on how the goals tie to the organizational goals, etc. Right? So similarly, we have questions against each of them. And what you see, in fact, here, the colors are in fact like a reflection of the score which comes against each of these questions. It's an average of all the questions. So the way to think about this is like, say, for example, if decision making is in red, that means like the 3-4 questions which we ask again decision making, they add up to a score less than 70%, right? So that's what it means as red. And yellow is 70 to 85, and high is like greater than 85. Now you also will see that some boxes are colored and some boxes are not colored. Again, the rationale here is that what we also do, which is a scientific model which helps you prioritize, is we do a correlation between each of these boxes and the employee NPS. So employee NPS is coming from one question, and you have all these multiple questions asked against each of these boxes. The correlation helps in seeing like which of these boxes, this is a statistical correlation, which of these boxes have a high impact on ENPS. So that means like which are the ones I should go after in order to have a needle movement on ENPS. Now in this case, if you see, all these colored boxes are the ones which have a high correlation with ENPS. And the colors themselves represent like the score. So you can see the metrics below. Red means like it's a low score and a high correlation. Yellow means there needs improvement and has like a high correlation with the NPS. And the white ones are insignificant because they are not having a high correlation to ENPS. So for a company like this, which is ENPS of 4, where there are a lot of things to tackle, this really helps go after those 3-4 things which they need to go after to actually go and get this ENPS up, because today they have the bottom quartile, and and for them, for this company particularly, they set up a goal to get to 40 over like a year. That's the goal they set, and this sort of helps in sort of going after the right kind of things. So this is the bird's eye view of what your org health looks like. But also the deep dives are very important. So like for example, in this case, if you see that all these colored boxes are the boxes which are driving ENPS, and you also see like what are their colors. Now let me get deeper into managers. So I remember like one of you also asked a question around managers earlier. Now in managers, what we do is managers, there is a score called manager NPS as well, similar to ENPS, which is about how much would you recommend the manager. And in this case, again, the same promoter manager detractor calculation. The manager NPS in this case for them was 24. So 24 is fine. It's slightly lesser than the median in the ecosystem. But at the same time, if you see, corp and tech are the places where there's a red and yellow score. So that means that there are 2 teams in the org, in this particular org, where there is a huge red call out against managers. So this deep dive view gives you a sense in terms of where to attack. It doesn't stop there. So one is manager NPS itself, but also the questions asked in the manager block are also all these kinds of questions, all the questions which are expected out of an effective manager. These are things like recognition, whether the manager cares for people, whether the manager does regular one-on-ones, whether the manager is fair, whether the manager value opinions, problem solving, ownership, and not micromanaging. So these are all the things which we have found in our work that very, very important for a well-functioning manager. Now in this case, you can see that there are 2 teams where manager effectiveness is broken, corp and tech. And tech is at minus 3.4. And you can see very clearly there are 3 areas which are not working for managers in tech. Regular one-on-ones, people are not valuing opinions, and problem solving help is not there. And in this case, we also went deeper and did few conversations. And what we found out was that there was actually a middle layer of tech which was missing, managerial layer which was missing. So there was like a CTO and senior leaders, and there were like a set of software developers. So that was what was sort of playing out, because of which this kind of a thing was coming. And also the even more one level further deep dive is in fact getting into the individual manager scorecards and really seeing like, how are they doing against each of these. So like in this case, if you see Parth as a manager clearly has 2 red callouts on technical knowledge and ownership. And also what we do is we also spend some time doing qualitative. So qualitative can be through comments which you get through a survey itself, or it can be through some one-on-one conversations we do. But these comments also add a lot of flavor and a lot of richness to these scores, what you see. So ultimately, like getting into this level of insight really gives you that level of insight needed to make the needle movement on managers, which is a core block to move your eNPS. That's a way to think about this. Yes,
and this is what Abhishek was asking earlier. How do you help managers develop? This is what you do to help managers develop. We get a very pointed feedback saying that, look, Parth, in your case, there are 2 areas that are deep red. You need to develop your own technical knowledge. You need to show a lot. You need to give people a lot more ownership. Don't micromanage too much. And for example, show a little more care and recognize people a little more. So we're giving them very pointed areas to become better at, to become better in as managers. This is how you help managers develop. Again, we don't have too much time, so we're going to skip through this very quickly. Arun?
Yes.
The limited point here is use something like this as an objective framework to listen to your employees very, very frequently, at least once in a couple of quarters, for you to know what's going on in the company, what are people feeling about various departments, about managers, about various teams in the company, and use this framework to then be able to make interventions to improve employee satisfaction. Go to the next slide, Arun. Show the waterfall, please. This is a typical waterfall that comes out after you've done the survey. You're at an eNPS of 4. To get to 24, here are the 3 big things that you've got to do. 4 big things that you've got to do. 1, create your manifesto, because that is what people are saying. They do not have a unified view of what the company stands for. So build your manifesto. 2, in this company's case, PM and rewards were broken. So please make sure that your PM and rewards are taken care of through, for example, benefits revamp and defining your PM process. Focus on the technology team. As we showed you in the previous slide, technology team was really struggling. And 4th, identify the bottom quartile managers and put in place specific development plan for those managers to help them become better managers. If managers become better managers, employees automatically are more satisfied employees. So, this is how you can use a very objective way to listen to your people and then to take actions to be able to improve employee sentiment without it being a very, very sort of subjective exercise. And we've done this now. We've known so many companies who've used this framework and really benefited in terms of having an objective numerical way of improving their employee sentiment.
Can you just show once the manager MNPS sheet? Yeah. It was quite interesting.
Yeah, very quickly, Arun. So you got departmental wise, you look at data at a departmental level, data at a managerial level also, Abhishek, the MNPS score. See what is every manager's score. By the way, magic number is 40. When MNPS scores go above 40 for individual managers, their teams and their employees will have very high eNPS. Managers have the most impact on eNPS. If managers are taken care of, if managers are better managers, eNPS will automatically go up. Okay, the magic number is 40.
Makes sense. Thanks so much.
Let's move on, Arun. I think we should move on, Arun, and go to the self-reflection slide now. We can skip this, Arun.
Okay, I'll share the self-assessment, Neeraj.
Yes, please. I think let's skip this, Arun. I think what we want to do now is share with you a very small form. It's called the self-assessment form. Please, open the form up and fill it up. It'll be nice. Arun, can you stop sharing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's have all of you fill up the form, and then we'll go through collectively what are the self-assessment form telling us about the areas that need intervention, that need sort of urgent attention in your own companies. And we can do a very quick debrief after that for about 5 minutes to see collectively what are the areas that are emerging as the weakest areas.
I've shared the form in the chat link.
And Sonali, please keep an eye out on participation levels.
Yes.
As soon as we get to above 20, 22 people who participated, then we can obviously start showing the results. Any question needs clarification, please feel free to ask. But they're fairly simple questions.
We have 4 responses so far.
Let's wait. We have 30 participants, so hopefully let's wait for 20 responses to come through.
I think this is where I'll step in and said we'd like to have more participation. Kindly engage in filling up the self-assessment form. I think post which Neeraj will discuss it further. Important to have all of you fill it.
My form is not taking next for some reason.
Can you
help?
Can you refresh, Samir, if you don't mind?
Samir, try refreshing.
No, unfortunately, some compatibility issue. I don't know.
What system are you on, Samir? How are you accessing it? Is it through a laptop?
Yeah, I'm on laptop. Yeah.
And what browser are you using?
This is
Is everybody else fill up?
Google.
Okay, Chrome, is it?
Chrome, yeah.
So far, Neeraj.
Sorry?
17 responses so far.
Okay. Samir, we apologize. I don't know what's happening at your
No
end.
problem. It's okay.
Try opening it in some other, maybe an Internet Explorer or something. No?
Yeah, perhaps. It should work on Chrome, though. I wonder what's happening.
Neeraj, being conscious of time, we are at 5:43.
Yeah.
Post the self-assessment, would you like to take more questions?
Yeah, we should. So we should finish this in the next 5 minutes, and then of course we'll get to the Q&A. Why don't you show the results, Sonali?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please share the screen. You can keep refreshing it as we go along. Okay, come down. Yeah, so the average score is 5.1 on 9. Clearly hiring, not surprisingly. Hiring is the biggest sort of area that people are calling out to be red. Team opinions are looking green. One-on-ones are also not bad. Communication is also not bad, which is good to see. Hiring is a little bit of a problem. We share feedback with each other regularly. Hiring is clearly the right process. So, we spoke about having a manifesto, having values, having competency rubrics defined. That as a hiring process. Do debriefs. It's a very standard 10 on 10 process that we have. We can share the slide with you also separately. But it's good to see by and large that a lot of people are talking about the fact that they communicate openly and freely. Team members are growing with the org, and the fact that you value the opinions of everybody in the company. This is all very good news. And obviously, 2 areas that are red are we share feedback with each other regularly. I think that can become slightly better. But the one area that is deeply red is the hiring process is completely broken. Look, if the hiring process is completely broken, the chances are that the company will start to stutter also over a period of time, because the right sort of people will only, will allow you to actually grow in the right manner. So very, very important to think about what we spoke about in the earlier part of the roundtable, which is put in place your manifesto, put in place your values, define your values, define your competency rubrics from that, and use that to start your hiring process. Arun, you should share a one-slider on the 10 on 10 hiring process also with the group later. I mean, you can give it to Archana and Ruchika, and they can share it with the participants. But that will help the group understand how to hire sort of when. Come down. This is good. Please come down. This is good. I mean, I'm happy to hear the fact that valuing opinions of team members is rated very highly across the board. Communicating openly and freely is rated very highly, which is very, very good to see. And even regular one-on-ones is not bad. But yeah, I think regular one-on-ones, not only should you guys do regular one-on-ones, but please encourage your managers and your leaders also to do regular one-on-ones with their respective team members. It goes a long, long way in breaking communication sort of barriers in the company and breaking silos in the company as far as the information flow is concerned. So yeah, this is good. I mean, again, very representative of what we've heard from most founders. Of course, a lot of people also call out and say that, look, at least we've been surprised to see how many companies say that one-on-ones are not being done regularly. This group, obviously, that seems to be done much better, but most companies that we've interacted with, one-on-ones is very, very infrequent, once in a month, once in 2 months. Typically, one-on-one should happen at least once in 2 weeks. And there's a certain format to do one-on-ones also, such that it doesn't become only about work. It also becomes about developing a good relationship with your sort of direct report. I'm also happy to see that communicating openly and freely is rated very highly, which is great. Most companies again struggle on that. On aligned towards a common goal, if people haven't heard about the OKR process, I think it is coming in one of the roundtables, subsequent roundtables. So we'll talk to you about how you can get all your team members to get aligned very well through the OKR process. That's one of the roundtable topics. So that will get addressed, and hopefully you can take it back and implement it in your companies. Appreciate each other's good work. Yeah, I think it's very important to sort of spend time rewarding each other, patting each other on the back, celebrating small wins. When you're a small team, I think it's very important for each other to feel appreciated, because people put in a lot of effort in smaller companies. So very, very helpful. Thank you so much. Any reflections from any one of you? Anything that anybody wants to take back as a pledge in terms of what you definitely want to do from these areas that you identified in today's self-assessment?
Yes, Neeraj, I have a confession in terms of the one-on-ones. I think I took the question as one-on-one what I have as a leader with my second line. I think you put in a very important point, whether the second line is having a one-on-one with the people down with their, I think that is, completely missing. And I think I take that as a point of reflection, taking from here that the one-on-ones are not only important from level 1 to level 2. I think they are important even further down the level. So that's something I would have probably gone to know rather than partially what I have written. So that's what I wanted to say about that point.
And it's amazing how this is the simplest thing that you can do to really energize the company and make everybody feel they're on the same page and everybody feeling that they're getting face time with their managers, and yet people don't do a good job with it. So please make it a very important ritual in the entire company across the levels.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Any reflections? Some of you have been very, very quiet through the entire roundtable. Would love to hear from the others also in terms of any reflection that you guys have had. Anything that you think is important for you guys to take back and start doing immediately.
In our setup, we appreciate each other for good work, but giving negative feedback sometimes becomes difficult.
Yeah. Why is that, Vinayak?
Probably still we have to work on a mutual transparency and that area.
I think the job, I think it's our responsibility in a company is not to create a happy environment all the time. That successes are celebrated, but failures are not going to be discussed and failures are not going to be spoken about. I think it's important for all of us to show the mirror to each other also, to say that, look, this is what we've done really well in, but by the way, there are 2 things that we didn't do well as a company and 2 things that we didn't do well as a team. And here is what we're doing to fix them. Very important to have an open dialogue, even on areas that have not gone well. Otherwise, frankly, we're just doing half the job, which is calling out the good things, but not calling out the areas that need improvement. And without calling out the areas that need improvement, they will never improve and the company won't move forward. So strongly, we'll urge you to start sort of consciously focusing on that as well. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's stop sharing, Sonali. Yes. Now let's open it up. Any reflections, any questions, any specific areas that you want sort of more answers to, we'd be very happy to take them now.
Yeah, I have one, sort of kind of request to understand what can be done. In my organization, there are many people who are senior or who are experienced in their domain, and they need to move to the next level. Now, what happens is that entrepreneurs, we have a lot of forums and we have a lot of exposure to environments for business. But for mid-level people to grow themselves and take initiative outside, there are not enough forums or mechanisms for them to learn or be in that space where they get exposure. So what is your recommendation? Because organizations will move to the next level when a lot of people inside will move forward in that direction. When you're only inside an organization, you don't get an outside view. And for management, moving towards management focus, what do you recommend the means for people to get that and move in that space?
Yeah, I think there are 2-3 things that can be done, Sameer. One is, look, if there are people who've got the intrinsics, high on learnability, very high on hard work, extremely passionate about the company, very deep context about the company, but they haven't got enough experience at a certain level, I think firstly, you must back them, you must throw them into the deep end. You'll be surprised at the number of times people positively surprise you, right? So one, please, if there are people who show the right intrinsics, only lack of opportunity or lack of exposure should not stop you from throwing them into the deep end. That's been my experience more often than not, that people have positively surprised me and people have actually shown the ability to be able to learn on the job. 2, I think if you're aware, if you're conscious about the fact that people do not get too many opportunities, I think it's important to start creating some avenues, some external projects, some sort of external coaching programs that will allow people to be able to widen their own horizons, right? I think it's important as managers, as leaders, as entrepreneurs to identify your right people and to sort of, one, throw them in the deep end, and 2, give them some support systems in terms of external projects, external coaching that can allow them to evolve, even external mentors. Sometimes just assigning an external mentor to somebody from outside of the system can be very, very powerful in terms of helping the person grow, because that person brings to the table some context that this guy wouldn't have typically had. So you should try these 3-4 things out. I mean, obviously we can have a deeper discussion on what sort of people are these, what sort of roles are you talking about. But yeah, principally, this is what we've seen work out more often than not in cases where people have not had the exposure to bigger roles, but you really want to give them bigger roles.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions, reflections?
Yeah, at times in the organization, we have some eccentrics, and they are really super performers, but they don't fit well with the culture in the organization.
Yeah.
What do you generally do with those kind of people, because they are outliers and means?
Ashwin, Arun has a term for these people. Arun calls them the brilliant jerks. These guys are very good at what they do. They are the ones who move the needle in terms of your critical metrics, but they're absolutely painful to be around, right? Such that other people call them like jerks. So at least here is our considered point of view on this particular aspect. You allow culture to get diluted. You allow culture to get sacrificed at the altar of performance. You will not have a company standing after a while, right? I think culture and the fundamentals of the company never being compromised are absolutely critical. For people who are brilliant at what they do, but are not able to align with the culture, sooner or later, they will end up causing a lot of damage in the company. We've seen companies where there's a brilliant sales head, who was able to take the company up significantly, 30-40% growth quarter on quarter. But the toxic culture that he spread in the entire company in terms of abusive behavior, in terms of not collaborating with people, holding off on critical information from other peers, I think ultimately became a very, very sad sort of end for the company in terms of having to fire the person, having to see tremendous amount of attrition in the company, such that the individual brilliance of that guy was getting overshadowed by the collective destruction that was happening in the company. Right? So 2 things. 1, anybody who's brilliant at his job, I think you should make sure that you give him feedback very, very quickly and in a very non-ambiguous manner, that compromising on cultural tenets of the company is not acceptable. Right? Yes, you're doing well in your core, in your performance metrics, but in the intrinsics, you're a deep red. And to me, intrinsics being deep red basically will overshadow everything else. Right? So many times I think founders are worried. Founders don't want to bail the cat because they're worried if he leaves and goes, मेरी company का क्या होगा? I think sooner or later you will have to have a conversation, and at that time it will be a very, very unpleasant one, because that guy will become even more cast in his ways. He will become even more powerful in the company, and then to be able to make changes is going to be very hard. So the minute you identify such people, please talk to them very, very quickly. And even if you've not done that so far, do it right away. Culture.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
I'm not saying culture is everything and performance is not, but I'm also saying that performance being everything and culture not being looked at all is also not acceptable, right? You have to have a balance.
Neeraj, at this point, can I ask Ruchika to put the feedback form here? As you all centers are aware that we take feedback very seriously, and because this is a 4-session thing that we have planned. It will be important to give us feedback. Ruchika, can you please put it up here? It will be important for us to take your feedback so that we can keep improving in each session that we go forward. Of course, there will be a little change in the different presenters that we have going forward from X to 10X, but nevertheless, as engaging as what we have had today.
Feedback link has been already shared with everybody in the chat box. If you can just click on that and submit your feedback, it will really be helpful to us.
I would pause here for 30 seconds while you take the feedback. It's not something that we want to do after. Let's give real feedback right now because it will only help us to improve.
Yeah, it's a very, very important input for us to make the subsequent roundtables better. So please be honest and please do take some time and give us feedback.
Yes. So let's take about 30 seconds to take this feedback now. I hope everybody is able to open it and submit it. If there are any challenges, please let us know. We have 2 minutes away. Neeraj, would we like to wrap up now, or does the audience have more questions for Neeraj and Arun? Should we take maybe 1 or 2 questions more?
Yeah,
I have a question, Neeraj.
Yes, please go ahead.
So Neeraj, basically, I just wanted to know, like, if you have like different divisions and then like suppose like we have maintenance, we have drivers section and everything. So if you do that percentage wise increment of all the sections, that how does that work basically? Because staff gets the same percentage increment as the drivers, as the mechanics or something like that?
No, look, best practices in some companies cannot necessarily be ported to every company, because your context is very different.
Okay.
If you've got such different departments in the company, obviously you can't have the same percentage hike being given to everybody. It will vary by department because, like you said, drivers versus maintenance staff versus corporate staff, very, very different strata of the society, strata of the population. You must have policies that are specific to different segments of population within your own company. So like I was giving you the example earlier, Abhijit, CureFit had a different set of policies for corporate staff, very different policies for physical fitness trainers, very different policies for food delivery staff, for kitchen staff, doctors and nurses. The same policies don't apply everywhere, right?
Thanks.
You've not got enough feedback in the back end. Please, I request you to kindly fill the feedback form and submit. Right, we are at 6, Neeraj. I think we should wind up while people take the feedback. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Neeraj and Arun for conducting this session. I'm sure each one of you have had great insights, and I like the fact that we kept it engaging. I think there were some really brilliant questions, some conversations around different things. So thank you so much for that. And also thank Sonali and from X to 10X and Ruchika from my team who have tirelessly worked hard to put these 4 sessions together and make this come together. So a huge thank you to all of you, and thank you to all the participants for keeping this engaging and enthusiastic. We would like to also look forward to the next session, which is going to be on company operating system, which will be conducted on Friday, 27th August, same time, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Like I mentioned, it's imperative that you attend all 4 sessions. It's only going to benefit you. Neeraj, a few words before we say thank you.
No, thank you to all of you for joining this session. It was very, very engaging for us personally. It's always nice to keep hearing questions coming our way because that makes it interactive, that makes it fun for us also. I love the depth of questions that came in even before the session. Right. So thank you all for participating. Have a good weekend. It's a Friday evening. I was very worried that on a Friday afternoon would people have the energy to listen to a 2-hour sort of a session. But I want to thank you for your energy and for your active participation.
Right. Thank you all, and see you all on 27th August for the next session. Thank you. Good night, and stay safe.